Within this video, we're going to walk through how to create a custom UI that we can link to the stat device. The stat device is actually going to keep track of stuff as well. For example, we have experience and level. So every time we actually damage this, you can see that we get one experience. And once we actually get to the third experience, we actually go to another level. And when we go up another level, you'll notice that we get a small animation on the little icon. So without further ado, let's go ahead and check out how this is created. First, let's begin by coming down to the content drawer, and inside of our devices, we're going to go ahead and do a search for the stat device. So we're going to go ahead and use this one right here, the stat creator. So we're going to just click and drag this into our world like so. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a new name just to make sure that I don't get it confused with any of the other ones that we have in here. I'm just going to add my at the beginning of this. So with my stat creator created, let's go ahead and go into its details. And what we want to do is go ahead and give this an actual name. So the stat name, we're just call this one character levels. Now just below it, under our max value, this is where we're going to control how many experience points we need per level. So go ahead and toggle this one on, and in this case, to make it nice and easy to test, we're going to set this at 3. Just below it, we have a max level. This max level, we're going to go ahead and set to 5. So we have a total of 3 experience points per level, and a total of 5 levels all day. Next, we want to go ahead and set up the widget that we're going to need for this. Now, down here below, you can find our user widget, and we don't want to use the default one that is inside of here. So let's go ahead and create a new one. So we'll go down into our content drawer, and I do have a folder for this already. So we'll go into our UI folder, go ahead and right click. Inside of here, we're going to go ahead and choose the user interface. Inside the user interface, we're going to go ahead and choose this widget blueprint. When this dialog box pops up, let's go ahead and just choose this first one right here, user widget. Then just go ahead and give it a specific name. In this case, I'm just going to call this my stat widget. Now we can go ahead and just double click on it to open it up. Now to give us full control on where this widget is actually going to be placed on screen, we're going to want to start with a canvas panel. So over here inside of the palette, I'm going to just grab a canvas panel. I'm going to just drop it down here into the hierarchy. The canvas panel alone won't be enough. There is something that we need to adjust inside the device too. So let's go back into our level, and with our device selected, we want to find this little section right here. This is show widget in list. When this is toggled on, we're actually going to get a widget list of all of these stats over here on the left-hand side of the screen. And we may or may not want this. In this case, we do not want that. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle this one off. Now, when we go ahead and add an overlay, so let's go ahead and just grab an overlay right here, we can control, with the overlay selected, where this is actually going to be placed on screen. And we can use our anchors up here at the very top. Now, in my case, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my widget is always going to be over here on this side, just to make it real easy and so that it actually shows up exactly like it was in the example before. So underneath our anchors, I'm just going to go ahead and hold down Control and Shift and go ahead and click on this button, which will align it to the center right. Now, before we move on, let's take a moment and talk about what this anchor actually does. So with this overlay selected, I'm going to come down here where it says position X. I'm just going to click and drag in this field, and I'm just going to add some space over here on that right-hand side. So like so. Now, if we go ahead and change the screen resolution by clicking and dragging on these little arrows down here in the bottom right-hand corner, this will represent all the different kinds of screens that our players might be on. They may be on something like mobile, and we want to make sure that that widget is actually staying over there on the right-hand side. So regardless of what size screen the player actually has, this anchor will ensure that this widget stays relative to it. So it anchors this widget right down here. So let's go ahead and just reset that so that we understand what anchors do. We can use them more effectively in every other project that we create. All right, so back to the overlay. Now this overlay is going to be a container that's going to hold all of the other pieces. So the first thing we're going to want to add is some sort of a background. So we can use an image to do that. So we'll just go ahead and just click and drag an image from up here and drop it into our overlay. Let's go ahead and give this image a specific name. So we can go and select it and hit F2. I'm just going to call this one background. Next, we want to go ahead and give it a specific size. So to change the specific size of this background, with it selected, we'll make sure that we are under Appearance, underneath Brush, and make sure that the image size is actually opened up. Now, I already know how big everything is going to be, so go ahead and play with this size so it'll match whatever it is that you need to create. So we can actually change the X and the Y value here. Now, I know that I'm going to need a 400 along the X and a 250 along the Y. Now, you'll notice that this background is being constrained by the size of the actual overlay. And we can adjust that simply by selecting our overlay. And over here, we're going to look for the size to content. We want to go ahead and toggle this one on. Yeah, it's a checkbox. So now with this on, we know that this is going to be 400 wide by 250 tall. And if you have any questions about it, just go back to your background image and go ahead and just change your value in here. And you'll see that this does actually change dynamically. Now let's go ahead and give this box a little bit more love. So let's go ahead and zoom in on it so we get a better shot of it. And with it selected, we can go ahead and change the color. I'm going to make it kind of a dark gray. So we can go ahead and change our tint right here. Click on this and we'll go ahead and just knock this down a little ways. Let's go ahead and take all the color out of there. That's pretty good. Go ahead and say OK. Next, let's go ahead and change our draw as. And we're going to change this from image down to a rounded box. Now the corners are a little extreme, so let's go ahead and change that. And to do that, we're actually going to change the rounding type right here. So instead of half height radius, we're going to go ahead and change this to a fixed radius. This will actually give us control over each one of the corners. So here under our corner radii, I'm going to go ahead and type in a value for 50, and you can see that we can control each corner individually, which is very helpful. Now, we do want an outline on this. I'm not going to touch this outline section right here because I do want it to be black. However, I want to come down here and say this use brush transparency. Go ahead and just toggle this one on. You'll notice nothing happens. You're like, oh, great demo, man. So what we want to go ahead and do to see the outline on this is go ahead and change our width value right here. So just click and drag this in here. And you can go ahead and type in a specific value that you're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and just give this a value of 10. So now we have a nice background that we can build on top of. Which brings us to actually adding in an icon. So you can use any icon. We're going to go ahead and use a texture. So let's go ahead and grab an image up here and we'll drag it down here onto the overlay so we know that it's inside of it and make sure that it is selected. And you'll notice that it is up here in the top left-hand corner. We'll go ahead and change the alignment over here on the right-hand side in the details. Go ahead and just use our center align and that'll put it right in the middle. And now what we're going to do is add in the specific texture that we want. Now you can use any texture you would like. I'm going to go ahead and just use our Cleverlike logo. So just make sure that this is selected. And then over here, I'll just click on this add right here. Now we have that in here. Now this is obviously way too big, so that's not great. So let's go ahead and change our image size. So instead of being 512 by 512, I'm actually going to make this a 128 by 128. So there it is. Now it's directly up against that left-hand side. So to adjust this, we're going to go ahead and change its translation. And you can find your translation right here underneath our render transform and then translation. So we have our X and our Y. So our X is going to be side to side. So let's see if we can just move this over a little bit. So right about there should work pretty well for what we need. And just a little housekeeping because we're going to need names later. Let's go ahead and just name this one stat icon. Now at this point, if you actually haven't saved, I would highly suggest doing that now. Don't forget to compile. But we're going to go ahead and move on and go ahead and start to add in this section right here. So this is a stack box, and inside of it, we actually have another stack box right here. These stack boxes just help keep things very organized and aligned. So let's go ahead and just grab a few of those. So over here inside of our palette, I'm going to go ahead and find our stack box. We'll just click and drag this onto the overlay once again. Now, we're not going to be able to see much of it, even if we select it. So let's put something in it so we know where it is. So let's go ahead and grab a text block. So this text block we'll just add into our stack block like so. And to move this stack box, we're going to go ahead and use the translation, just like we did earlier. So just click and drag right here, and we should be able to get this to move. There we go, about like so. And let's go ahead and just click and drag down a little bit like so. Perfect. Now this text block, let's make sure that it is selected. We need to give it a name so we know what it is. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and call this one experience text block. I'm just going to delete the beginning of this. And we want it to actually have some letters written inside of it. So under our text field, we'll go ahead and just call this one experience like so. Now, let's give it a little bit more love. Let's go ahead and change the color. I'm going to use something that's really obvious, so we'll use a purple. And I do want to go ahead and add an outline to this as well. So underneath our font section, you'll have to open up your outline settings down here below. And then in here, we have our size. Let's just say 2. So perfect. Now we have this one. Now, the beauty of setting this up now is that we can actually duplicate this. And duplicating it with all of these properties set up is just going to be much more efficient. So let's go over to our hierarchy and make sure that we have this text block selected. And I'm going to hit Control D, and you'll notice that we get one to the right. And this is because this stack box is actually set to be horizontal as opposed to vertically aligned. So over here in the orientation, we're going to just change this from horizontal to vertical. And that'll be one on top of the other. Now let's go ahead and just change the actual text that is inside of this, and we don't want it to be an experience. We want this to be how many points the player currently has. So I'm just going to call this one now points. And we need to go ahead and change the text. I'm just going to call this one now because it's not going to be super important. We're going to be able to change this with code here in a little bit. So next we want to go ahead and wrap this with another stack box, allowing us to actually set it up so that we have how many points we have now we'll have a little slash right here, and then how many points we need total. So we need one stack box that is a horizontally aligned one. So with this one selected, I'm just going to right click on it and then come down here. We can say wrap with, and we go ahead and say stack box. Now this one we want to be horizontal, so let's make sure that this stack box is actually set to horizontal. It is by default, so perfect. And let's go ahead and grab this, and we'll go ahead and duplicate it again. Let's go put a slash in here. And then we'll go ahead and duplicate it one more time. And this one we're going to go ahead and set to the max number of points. The next piece that we need is the actual stat name. Now, in our case, it's just going to be levels, but let's just make sure that it's something generic so that we can prove that the code is actually working later. So let's go ahead and select this specific text block. And again, here in the hierarchy, with it selected, I'm going to hit Control D, which will duplicate it. Now, we need to make sure that it is underneath the now and max. So we got a couple options here. We can actually either move it here in the hierarchy, or we can actually use these little arrows right here as well. So we'll go ahead and just click that down. So let's go ahead and just change this to actually read as stat name, as well as change its color. So we'll go ahead and just change this from a purple to a green to make it really obvious. Now below the actual stat name, we need to actually have the value of whatever the stat happens to be. So in our case, it'll be level. So again, we'll go ahead and just make sure that this is duplicated. So just select it in the hierarchy, Control D to duplicate it. And this one, we're actually going to put the stat value. And just to be cheeky, we're going to go ahead and just set this as 007. Now you'll notice that the alignment is a little bit close to the icon. So let's go ahead and grab our stack box here, and I'm going to go ahead and change our translation so it's over just a tiny bit. That'll help a little bit. Now the other thing that we can actually do is change some of the sizes of this. I would like this one to be a little bit larger. So you'll see that the font size here is actually set at 32. I'm going to go ahead and just set this as, let's say like 50. That's a little big, but whatever. It'll go ahead and work pretty well. But I do want to go ahead and align this again. The artist in me is like, hey, that's not perfect. So that's pretty good. Feeling all right about that? All right, cool. So there we go. Now we got all the text blocks that we need. Now, don't forget to save and compile everything that you've been working on thus far, and let's go back into the level. And the reason that we're coming back here is, remember this thing? We actually need to set it up so that it's using this specific widget. So to do that, with it selected, we're actually going to scroll down here until we find our user widget. And then we're going to just click on this drop down, and what we're going to look for is the one that we've created. In my case, this is the My Stat widget that we created at the beginning of the video. So now that this widget is actually being used by this device, we can go ahead and ensure that it's working correctly, because the actual stat name, when we actually play the game, will be in right here and replace this text. And in order to do that, we're going to need a specific view model so that we can actually bind these pieces together. And to do this, we'll just come down here where it says View Bindings and open this one up. Now, we don't have any view models in use in this specific widget, and we don't have any bindings. So this little section is going to look very empty. So to add one in, we'll just go ahead and just click on this Add View Model. Now for our next step, we are asked which device are we actually going to be connecting this widget to. And we can see right here, we have a stat view model. So this is the one that we're going to go ahead and use. And on the right hand side, you can see that we have things like is maximum, level, we've got name and value. And real quick, let's go back into the level, and you can see that we have, hey, here's our max level right here. Here's our name. So we know that this is the one that we want to go ahead and use. So let's go back into our widget, go and click on our view model button here. Make sure that we actually grab our stat view model, and then go ahead and just choose the select button right here. Now, don't worry about this warning, just completely ignore it. And we can actually just close this down because we're not going to need it. So next, if we go ahead and open up our view bindings now, we can see that it's not asking us for which view model we're going to be using, because there's one already associated with this widget. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and start to add in these widget pieces. So I'm going to move this up just so we can see what exactly we're specifically working with. So I'm going to go ahead and select this stat name, and you can see that this widget over here on the far left-hand side is actually selected. We're going to go down into our view bindings, and now when we click on this button, you can see that it is actually trying to add a binding to this specific part of our widget. So we're going to just click on this. Now, real quick, let's talk about the flow of what's actually happening here. So this field right here is actually going to move its information into this field right here. So this stat name text block, we're actually going to click on this one. And what we're looking to change is the text information that is inside of this widget. So we'll select text and then go ahead and choose select down here at the bottom. Next, we need to say what it is that we're going to be feeding into it. So inside of this field to select, we'll go ahead and choose this one. And this right here, this MVVM UEFN stat is the actual view model. So we'll select this because the information that is inside of this specific device is going to be pushed into the text on our screen. And the information that we want to actually put onto the screen is the name that is actually inside of the device. So we'll choose name and then choose select. So now make sure that we actually compile and save. And if we were to go ahead and test this, which I very much believe that we should see that this will actually pop up on screen, and that specific value, this one right here where it says stat name, will actually read whatever value we put here inside of our stat name. In my case, it actually says character levels. So let's go ahead and just push all these changes and see if this is going to work for us. All right, and now that it's actually loaded, you can see that over there on the right, it does actually say character levels. So we know that this information is actually being pulled from the device into the widget, and the view model is actually putting that name into that specific text block so that we see it here on screen. All right, back here inside of the widget, let's go ahead and work with this now part. So this is how many points the player currently has. So to deal with this, let's make sure that this one is actually selected in the hierarchy. Go down to our view bindings and let's go ahead and add in this widget binding. And let's go ahead and close the other one because it's not going to be important. So this specific text block, we want to go ahead and change its specific text. So we'll choose text inside of this dropdown and choose select. Now for this next step, it's a little bit different from the previous in that we have a text block, but we're going to be feeding it integer information. So we have two different types. So to deal with that, we have to use a function. Well, lucky for us, Epic has already built this information in here. So inside of this field, we're going to come down to our conversion functions. And inside of here, you'll see a toText integer. Go ahead and make sure that you choose the integer in this case. So we'll select that and then go ahead and choose select down here at the bottom. Now you'll notice we get a whole bunch more information down here below, and it's asking us a specific question. Specifically, what value are we going to be sending it as an integer that we're going to convert into text? Well, that value happens to be what's here inside of this device. More accurately, it's better to say that the information is actually coming from the stat counter, and the stat counter will be sending the information to the stat creator device, which will then put it on the UI. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's actually go back to working with this event binding here inside of the widget. So inside of here, we're going to go ahead and click on our little link button right here. And then this gives us a dropdown. So inside of our dropdown, we're going to go ahead and go into our view model again. And inside of this one, what we're looking for is the actual value right here. So select that and then choose select. So now we've got a little bit more of an extended chain of flow. So this value that's actually coming from our device is going to be an integer. And we're going to go ahead and use a function to convert that into text, which is then going to show it up on our widget. So this is all ready to go. So let's make sure that we compile and save that. So in order to see this actually work, we're going to have to set up some more pieces inside the actual level. So let's go back into there. Let's go into our content drawer. And specifically what we're looking for inside of the devices is our stat counter. We're going to use this one to actually increment our points. So we'll go ahead and select this, drop it into our world. I'm going to rotate it and make it a little bit larger so we can see it, and I can select it a little bit easier. Now within this stat counter inside of our details, we have this tracked stat, and we need to set this to match this specific stat. So right here where it says character levels, this is what we're actually looking for inside of our tracked stat. So in here, we click on this. Down here at the very bottom, we have one that says character levels. Now the one above it, in this case, it actually says levels. Ignore this one because we don't want to change the level. We're actually looking for experience points. So let's go ahead and use this character levels. Now the next thing that we need to do is to make sure that this is actually working as a counter. So for our value override type, we don't want to set it. We want to go ahead and add 1 point every time. So we'll change this drop down from set to add. And last, inside of this little section, we're going to go ahead and change our value override. We don't want to add 0 points. We want to add 1 point. So we'll go ahead and just change that to the value of 1. Now down here below inside of our functions, we can see that we can actually override that value. And this is where a little bit more setup is actually going to come into play. This is also the point in the video where this is going to be completely up to you and your specific game. In my case, I'm going to set it up so the player actually gets experience for whacking at a cactus, but I want to make sure that the cactus is going to be invincible, and I'm going to use the prop manipulator to detect every time the player actually hits it with their harvesting tool. So that's what I'm doing right here. So with the game mechanic actually set up, I'm going to make sure that my counter is selected. And then over here in my override values, let's go ahead and add an array element and go ahead and choose that prop manipulator. And I want to make sure that this prop manipulator is sending a signal every time this cactus is actually damaged. So now they should get experience every time they actually hit the cactus with their harvesting tool. What this also means is that we should be able to go ahead and test everything to make sure that the value is going to change inside of the UI. So let's make sure that we save everything and then go ahead and push the changes and test it in game. So we can see immediately that that value is actually set to 0. So something is going on. And if we hit this, hey, it goes up 1, 2, 3, and then it actually resets. So cool. We know that we're actually getting information from all the devices and they're working correctly all the way through the flow so that it actually shows up on screen. So next, let's go ahead and connect the rest of the bindings inside of the widget. And the next two we're going to do are these ones right here. So there's the max as well as the actual level. Now these are going to be basically exactly the same as the one that we had just done, which was the now. So let's just go ahead and do that. So our view bindings, let's go ahead and open this up. And I am going to go ahead and dock this just to make it a lot easier to actually see what we're doing in one go, because we're going to be paying attention to a couple of things on screen. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and just click on the max, make sure that it is selected here in the hierarchy, and go ahead and add in the binding for this. Now, just like before, we want to go ahead and change the text. So from our field right here, we're going to go ahead and choose text, click on select. And then for this field right here, we want to go ahead and use the conversion. And in this case, again, it's going to be the integer. So we'll go ahead and select that one. And the integer that we want to pump in there is going to go into our value section right here. So we'll click on the little link. And then inside of this one, we'll come back down into our view model because this is going to connect to the device. And specifically what we're looking for is the max value right here. Now, real quick, before we go ahead and use this, the reason that we're adding this in here is because if we end up using a function specifically inside of the device, so let's go ahead and take a look at what that one is. It's this one right here, this points per level multiplier. If we change this from 1 to something else, this max value right here will actually change, and that information is going to be pulled from here. So as the designer actually changes something, they don't need to come back here into the widget and actually set this value as whatever it happens to be. It'll just do it automatically. All right, so the last one we need to go ahead and do is the level right here. So same process, make sure that it's selected, and go ahead and add in the binding. Again, we want to go ahead and change the text. And then we're going to make sure that we are using a conversion function. And then again, we'll just make sure that that value is actually being fed in from the specific device. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and use the level because we want to know what the current level of the player is. Perfect. So let's go ahead and compile and save all that. And of course, let's go ahead and push changes to make sure that everything is actually working. So we can already see that the level has actually changed. Instead of being 007, we actually see the level on number 1. And we can see the 3 right here lets us know the number of experience points we need to go up the level. So if we go ahead and hit this, hey, that updates. Perfect. And once we get to that 3rd one, hey, we actually go up 1 more level. So perfect. We know that this is actually working like it needs to. So let's move on to the last piece where we're going to animate this icon to pulse every time we go up a level. So let's go ahead and select this icon to make sure that this is the one that we're going to be animating. And we'll come down here into animations. And we need to actually create a specific animation. We do that by clicking on this animation button right here. And let's go ahead and give this a new name. I'm going to call this icon pulse. Then we need to select this animation. And because we actually have our icon selected, this little add button, when we click on it, we'll actually be able to see that. And you can see that the stat icon here actually matches the name inside of the hierarchy. So we're going to click this one. Now we need to actually add a transform track so that we can animate its scale. So to do that, we're going to click on this little plus button right here. And then we'll go ahead and choose transform. Now real quick, I want to point out that by clicking on this 20 FPS and then coming up here to show time as, I've got this set as frames. So if you want to animate in frames, you can do that, but you can also animate in seconds as well. Let's go and just keep it as frames for now. Now to make this happen really quickly, we're just going to use about 10 frames and we can adjust this afterwards. So let's go ahead and open up the transform section and then open up the scale because we're going to need both of these in just a moment. However, we can go ahead and just click this little button right here and this will add in a keyframe. Now, if you don't see any keyframes, don't worry. I think this is just a glitch in the system as of this recording. But what we can do is go ahead and just move our scrubber. So click and drag this over and we'll say frame 10 and we'll come back down to scale and we'll go ahead and click again And hey, now we actually see our keyframes. So perfect. That's exactly what we want. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this one. I'm just going to hold Control and use my scroll wheel. And then let's go ahead and just right mouse click and drag this over so I can kind of see what's going on. So over this 10 frames is when I want this icon to actually pulse. And I want to do it really quickly. So let's go ahead and set this at frame 2. I guess this will work well. And change the scale in both X and Y to 2. So we're going to double the size of this. And then I'm going to go ahead and select these keyframes. I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard, and then I'm going to click and drag this, and I'm just going to copy these keyframes over to, say, I don't know, frame 5. Next, what I'm going to do is just make this a whole lot smaller. So I'm going to click and drag this to about, let's say the 8th frame. And then I'm going to go ahead and change my scale on this one to like 80%, so 0.8, like so. So now, as we drag our scrubber across here, it gets big, and then it kind of bounces at the end. A little bit of secondary animation in there, which is nice. Now, to actually see this, we can just click on the play button right down here at the bottom. Yeah, and that actually feels pretty good. So we did pretty good. Don't have to actually kind of rearrange the bits and pieces. Now, one major thing that I want to point out is that the keyframes here and the keyframes here are exactly the same. They hold the value of just 1, which means we don't need to come up to Transform and right mouse click. Come up here to Edit Section, and then when finished, we don't need to actually say Keep State. However, if your keyframes are different at the beginning and the end, and you want the values from the keyframes to persist after the animation has ended, we want to make sure that we set Keep State. Like I said, in this case, because it's going to be the exact same at the beginning and the end, we don't have to worry about that one. So now that we have this all set up, we can go ahead and close this animation. Let's make sure that we compile and save. And now our next step is to go ahead and bind this animation to a condition. That condition being whenever the player goes up a level. So let's go back into our view bindings, and inside of here, we're going to add a condition. So we'll click on this button, and you can see here we have our widget. So down underneath, we'll go ahead and use this field right here. So when our device, specifically the level, we'll go ahead and select that, is greater than or more than 1, we want to go ahead and play an animation, specifically this one. Let's go ahead and open this up so you can see this here. So our cue play animation, and the animation that we want to go ahead and play, we'll go ahead and link this, exists inside the widget and is the icon pulse one we just created. I'll go ahead and select that. Now this logic may seem a little bit strange when you first think about it, but the level is going to start as 1 and it'll always be greater than 1, like 2, 3, 5, 10, 50. So it'll play every single time it registers that the level is greater than 1. So with all this set up, we can go ahead and compile and save, and then let's go ahead and test this in game by pushing changes. All right, so a moment of truth. Let's watch that little icon and yay, it works. So there you have it. Now you know how to go ahead and use the statistics device, the UMG, create your own widget, create bindings with the view bindings, as well as animations to make it all run here inside of the game. So if you have any other questions, comments, concerns, or confusion you need cleared up so that you can continue to create, go and just leave a comment down below. We'll get back to you when we get a chance. And of course, don't forget to be Cleverlike and subscribe.